The the place that I really wanted to start off with was just doing a brief introduction of myself and Christine. My name is Snehal Kumar, and I am one of the Asian American Psych Association postdoc leader fellows. And we created this 4-part webinar series that we wanted to share with everybody. Christine, I would love if you could briefly introduce yourself too.
Yes, yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Christine. I am the AAPI postdoc fellow, and then happy and excited to be the host of the webinar. And currently, I'm working at UC Berkeley's Counseling Center, and I have my private practice in the Bay Area.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. I guess I should also let you know a little bit, like I'm in private practice too, and I'm in the New York City area. One of the wonderful things about the Asian American Association is that we have this chance to build across in a way that would be very difficult to do. So this webinar series is a 4-part webinar series that we came up with because of our own research, clinical, and personal experiences, where we saw that the complexity and the power and nuance to Asians in the US so often get flattened. And in that flattening, both that comes externally and also sometimes internally, there are ways in which that we can be disempowered, both as individuals and also as a collective force. So we wanted to really create this webinar series as a way for us to offer an opportunity to hear our stories and hear the power and beauty to the Asian American or Asian experience that exists in the US. I'm going to turn it briefly to Christine so that she can actually talk a little bit more about today's webinar. And Christine, I'll take over the admitting.
Okay, yes, because I feel like I'm trying to admit participants too. Yeah. So for today's webinar, our topic is owning your strengths in AAPI storytelling panel. Very, actually, it's my personal curiosity as well. We really see the way we tell our stories has an important impact on our ability to see ourselves and to navigate this world, social world around us. And then our invited guest speakers today, Nellie Tran and then Ying Li, they will share their personal and professional stories about their journey with learning to own their strengths and the impact this mindset had on them. So the themes today will include confidence, humility, overconfidence, and navigating culture and subculture norms. So I'm really curious to hear more about what they're gonna say. Yeah.
So I wanted to do a brief intro of our speakers. I feel like words don't really do them justice, but we'll try. Ying J. Lee is a licensed marriage and family therapist in private practice. Before becoming a therapist, Ying worked in investment banking and technology for over 15 years. In private practice, Ying exclusively works with Asians and Asian Americans, and she's psychodynamically trained and culturally informed, as well as socially justice-oriented. Ying started Asians Do Therapy, a resource online and a podcast to help normalize Asian communities' experiences in therapy and mental health. Ying, I'm so glad that you chose to join us. Super excited that you're here. Our other speaker, Nellie Tran, is the daughter of Vietnamese refugee boat people and is an associate professor at San Diego State University. She's an activist scholar and the vice president of the Asian American Psych Association. She's a community psychologist who works with schools, communities, and agencies to create systems-level changes. Her central mission, which I think is really boss, is to infiltrate systems of oppression, to disrupt from within for the purpose of creating more just and inclusive spaces. Thanks so much, Nellie, for joining. Christine, I'm going to switch it over to you.
Yes, yeah. So I couldn't wait to start this conversation because I so much want to know their stories and their journeys. And so I'll just jump right in, start with the question. What has your process with knowing and owning your strengths?
Do you want to take this one first? Or...
Well, this is a very big question, and then we could, we could back and forth a little bit more. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
I saw this question when you first sent it, and I just thought, how far back do you want us to go? Was my first thought. Mm-hmm. Because I feel like my journey has been, all over the place. I wish it was more linear. It's not. I don't know if I wish it was, but sometimes it feels like when we write about it, it feels very linear. It feels very planned, and it hasn't ever been that way. And I also feel like, my journey to owning my strength is ongoing. I felt like when you asked me to do this, I was like, my strength, I'm still doing that. I'm still learning where I have strength, what muscles I need to flex more, where are my strengths. And I feel like part of my journey has been figuring out how to understand those in a more Asian congruent way. I feel as though the places that I've been in my life have, in America, I was born and raised in San Diego. I was born 2 months after my parents arrived here in San Diego, and they had left Vietnam because my mom was pregnant with me. And so I feel like my journey meant that I had to, I felt like I had to assimilate. I felt like I was hyper vigilant to how to fit in, and that my parents were very much aware of if I could fit in, if I could meet the expectations that this world had for me, that I would be able to succeed. And that didn't work. So it didn't, they had this thought. I think it was very clear to them how I was going to make it in this country. And so I did that. And I thought I was, I love that you asked about overconfidence, because I thought I was doing it. But now, upon reflection, I realized I was not doing it. I failed the second grade, and but then my dad was like, no, she's not going to fail the second grade. And so we moved, and he told the new school I was in third grade. And even though the records came to the new school and said that I was supposed to repeat the second grade, the school decided to let me try it out. I then didn't get into college, despite feeling as though there was no reason why I shouldn't get into college, because I did everything I was told to do. I joined all the clubs. I had a relatively high GPA, and I thought I did everything right, and I didn't get into college. So I went to community college, and I was fine with that. But and I was lucky to have done that, because I discovered my love of psychology there. I also discovered myself more. I discovered how to, I discovered how to learn who I am and come into myself. I had been so trained to listen to all the voices around me and to figure out what the rules are and how to get by, that I had no idea how to make decisions where there were no rules and where there wasn't a right way to do things. So I went to community college. I transferred to UCLA, where, I was doing psychology. I didn't get into graduate school because Asians aren't a minority. And so my GRE scores were not high enough. And I was told if I was Black, if I was African American or Latino, that they could make exceptions for me, but I'm Asian, so I must meet the white standards of excellence. And I, tried to argue all the things about being Vietnamese. English isn't my first language, and they were like, no. So I feel like this is where I started to realize, maybe I'm not good enough, and maybe no matter how hard I pay attention to the rules and am the good girl, or that it was never going to meet the standard, because I wasn't paying attention to the right standard. And the standard that I had to come into learning about, and I went to graduate school in Chicago, and was the standard of being other. I was in Southern California my whole life, And I thought I was normal. I thought that, you know, I was trained that racism didn't exist, and that I was in full belief of the model minority stereotypes. And it wasn't until I got to UCLA and I accidentally took women's studies that I was just like, oh my gosh, they miseducated me. And I just, you know, the veil kind of got lifted, and I started to realize there was a different way to see the world, and that there was this subtext to everything that I had been living. And it made me have to take the journey of my life over again and see everything through a new lens. And I feel like that's been the journey that I've been on. And I feel as though the strength that I have uncovered is my ability to do that. My ability to read the subtext. And my strength has been in really trying to find the community that can support my different way of seeing the world. And, you know, I may not know what my strengths are, but I know how to surround myself with people who know. And they remind me, and they tell me, and they love me more than I can ever love myself. And they see the value and, you know, beauty in who I am. And I know that I will always struggle to see my own worth because of my own positionality, but I know how to find my people. And I know how to see strength and value in other people. And so that has been the most culturally congruent thing that I feel like I have been able to find and discover and do for myself, is to lean into my strength of being able to help others rise, because I can see strength in other people really well, but I cannot do it for myself. But I surround myself with people who can do it for me. And I am completely okay with that being the way that I am. So part of I'll leave it at that for now.
I feel very touched to hear this. I think it's just wonderful. You know, what stands out to me the most is that having a community that we can lift each other. Yeah, I think a lot of time, well, for me personally, I've seen and experienced a lot of competitiveness within our community. And then I'm just so touched to hear that this is also a community that we learn and then being able to lift each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of the traumas I have in my professional career, well, and my personal too, have actually come from other Asians who have been competitive. And I think I blame it on the systems that we were raised in, you know, that we've been taught that there's only room for one or maybe two of us, you know, and that so we have to be competitive, that we're not allowed to be in community. I really feel as though I was taught, you know, and even in the spaces where I wasn't taught about race, I actively came out of those spaces with an anti-Asian sentiment. I did not like myself. I did not want to be around other Asians because it felt, I knew that there was something wrong with that. And I remember having these conscious decisions like, well, I can't go to like UC Irvine because that's where all the Asians are. And I don't want to be accused of only being with Asians. And it took me a long time to realize that those ideas have nothing to do with me. They didn't come from me. They don't help me. And the more that I've leaned into doing work with my community, supporting my community, being a part of the Asian American Psych Association, the more I have found myself, and the more I found my people, and the more that I have risen in my work and in my voice. Because and then I realized this is what I've been kept from. This is what people feared, is if I came into myself, then I would rise and I would wreak havoc on the system. And I feel as though I've done a fairly good job of that. And so that's why I feel like we have to come together more, because there is strength in numbers, and there is good reason to fear all of us coming together. We will change the system, you know, but for the benefit of all, you know. I apologize. I have children at this hour at home.
No worry.
I don't know if I should share. I don't know what the timing of Yeah, I had this thought that when I was asked this question, what are your strengths? I really struggled with that. And I think, and I actually emailed Christine and Snehal about it. I'd be like, oh, can you give me some more prompts? I'm having a difficulty with this question. And I think that is part of maybe some of my cultural conditioning around not speaking to strengths so directly, or only speaking in this sort of interview. If I'm interviewing for a job, let me tell you my top 3 strengths. So it was kind of a sorting through what that question meant for me, and I did get some help from Christine and Snehal about it. To Nellie's point about having people around you that can reflect some of this, which was really helpful. So, just a little, how far back do we go? I was like, this is storytelling, so I'm going to tell a story.
Yes, please.
About Yin. I'm there's this feeling of otherness that always sort of very much present in my experience as a third culture kid who, grew up in these environments that I was the edge of belonging. And as a queer person, as somebody who comes from a working class background but went to private school, as someone who did investment banking but had zero interest in it, someone who did tech but is also kind of a little bit of a socialist, so like all these things that never quite matched up, and as somebody who's very practical and went to a very California school, who's very sort of into crystals and didn't have GRE. So it's never quite fitting in all these environments. And even within AAPI, I think I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a PsyD, so always it's sort of at the edge of belonging. So kind of figuring out what that meant for me. And simultaneously having some feeling of the desire to belong or the desire to be more similar to this other spaces. So when I became, being a therapist is a second career for me. So when I started private practice, I was very intentional about how I wanted to work and who I wanted to work and how much I wanted to work. And I think Christine said, or Snehal said, that I exclusively work with Asian and Asian Americans in my practice. And it was a very conscious decision. My first career was very much out of necessity, sort of this immigrant necessity and sort of this pressure to do what was expected of me. So in my second career, I was very intentional about it. This is how I want to work. I practice psychodynamic therapy with Asian and Asian Americans. And I think there's something about owning that otherness. So owning my strength, as you call it, but I think owning my identity. As Asian Americans, I think Stephen Yuan was saying something about, in an interview he did with the New York Times, that part of the Asian American experience is sort of thinking about everybody else, but no one is thinking about us. Mm-hmm. So for me, my practice is really centering both myself and my clients. And I think that is a process that took, my whole life, I'm in my 40s, to kind of really be able to do and be able to claim and say, this is who I am, is at the very center of my practice and what I do. And that's the space that I want to create for my clients.
I had goosebumps when I hear you say owning the otherness. I just feel like, wow, there's so much wisdom there. And I want to hear just a bit more about that. Yeah.
I think as therapists, there is this assumption that we should be able to want to work with everybody, mm-hmm. Or that we want the validation of the institution of, I don't know what institution, mm-hmm. but that we can't work with white people, that we want to, or there's a validation of if a white person wants to work with me, or if I get referrals from white clinicians, there's something about me that becomes worthy. And certainly I felt that pressure and that question or that desire. But it wasn't it was not enough. I don't know. I feel like there's something, and I practice out of Portland, Oregon, which for, I know there's some Portland folks in here. It's like the whitest city in America. This is like not the smartest decision for me to do, to like only see Asian people in the whitest city of America. And I'm not paneled with insurance. So on top of that, is like, doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So I think there's a bit of a rebellious or subversive quality to it. That's just like, no, I'm not gonna do this. I'm not gonna do what was always expected of me, to be open, to hide this part of me. I see a lot of Asian therapists, and I talk to a lot of Asian therapists, and people have a desire to only see Asian people or only BIPOC people, but there's a fear of it, to sort of name it that way, to sort of be straightforward about or direct about that. So then I see it on websites, I work with all these things, and then Asian American experience is a subset of that. And for me, that, and I understand that, but there is something about that that feels like then we're compartmentalizing some part of our experience, like that my Asianness is a subset, a bullet point, as opposed to the central fabric of who I am. So I think this is kind of owning, not my otherness, but my Asianness, otherness in this context, but
yes,
so sort of making that central, like my Asianness is everything. And then within that, there's these things that I work with, or these,
yes,
yeah.
I don't know how you all feel. I feel very inspired right now. I just feel very inspired to hear that centralizing our otherness. Yeah. I just really appreciate this sharing. Yeah. And one thing also stands out to me is that I think I can also share, I felt similarly that if I, get referrals from white colleagues or being able to see other BIPOC clients, there's a sense of validation. But I so much resonate with Ying shared that there's something about that isn't enough for me. And I just feel so touched hearing you say that too. There is another question on my list, but I'm not sure if Snehal want to say something here, or Nellie or Ying want to say something more about your process of knowing and owning the strengths. Yeah, our strengths.
I think one, I'm so glad the two of you are here. It's like, truly, this is the kind of power and nuance that I feel so often gets flattened. And I'm so grateful that the two of you are here. I also really resonated with the idea of that sense of having people in your corner who can reflect back to you your strengths, because that is honestly, that is what I do all the time, but I never languaged it as a cultural dynamic that worked in India, but doesn't necessarily work and can actually doesn't work at all, especially if you're the only one in the room. it's designed to not work, right? By making sure you're the only one in the room. So I've really appreciated both of you naming that dynamic.
I was going to say that, when I work with my undergraduate students and I talk about that with them, especially right now with the anti-Asian racism going on, and there's, asking how come we're so invisible, and we try so hard to care about the other groups, but nobody cares about us. I feel like, well, yes, because this is how we even operate interpersonally. That, when I'm with my Asian folks, I don't need to list off all of my accomplishments. Someone else will. My job is to do it for someone else. And so I'm going to talk about how great you all are and what a great idea this is. And then you're going to say, no, you're great because you've done X, Y, and Z. And then we're going to go back and forth. But if you only put one of us in the room, I'm going to do it for someone else, and no one's going to think to do it back for me. And so I get left out of that equation when there's only one of me, or when there are other Asians in the room that have not been taught that is an acceptable, acceptable interaction in a professional environment. And so I have to do it myself. And I feel like this might be one of your later questions, but when I have done that for myself, because early in my career at my first professorship, I was, I knew that I needed to seek visibility for my work, right? Like, be visible, pat yourself on the back, spread the wealth spread the news when you get something good. And everyone kept telling me that I needed to shut up. And I was told, I got my first big NSF grant. I was so proud. I was so excited. I wanted everyone to know, because apparently I saw everyone else doing it. So I thought, well, this is the behaviors that you're supposed to engage in. I will send it off to my dean. I will send it off to these people. I will take every interview that comes out about this project. I would do the press release. And then I was told that I lacked humility. And it felt so racially it felt like such a racially motivated term, that this person would say that I lacked humility, right? Like, you could not pick a better word to shame me, right? And that was when I knew that as an Asian American woman, I am not allowed to praise myself for my own work. Despite the fact that every women's training I went to said that I have to seek my own visibility, it was never meant for me, because it is not expected of me. And we know in the literature that people come holding expectations, especially when they lack awareness of those expectations, and you break them, they will get mad at you. So people were mad at me because, oh, how dare she be so great? And then people said I was throwing it in their face, that I needed to quiet down and not talk about my accomplishments. That is what they expected of me. And it's interesting because I was lucky enough to have people in my corner who helped me get out of that job. And I landed a job in my current institution where I'm almost embarrassed at how much visibility I get now for the work that I feel like isn't even that meaningful sometimes. But like, people left and right are like, let me write an article on it. Let me give you this praise and that. And I'm like, I just feel like, stop, it's too much. I didn't do that much, and I feel like if I were writing about this, as a researcher, I'd be like, that is exactly what is supposed to happen to be culturally congruent for me. Everyone else should make the big deal out of this. I should not have to do it for myself, because I'm busy doing it for other people. And then, and that I'm not taking power away from them, right? So even in this question of what is my strength, I feel like, I love that you also said, you're like, I can't answer that question, because I really did. I feel like I've never talked about my strengths except for in an interview context, because we know that that's the question you're going to get asked. So you better have a good answer for it. And being a good perfectionist, I was prepared for the question, but I feel like the line that was asked of me that I have held on to when it comes to this question is, you have power, you have privilege. What are you going to do with it? And to me, that is the strength. Can you own that the position you happen to be in comes with it inherently power and privilege? And now it's time for you to flex. So use your muscles, and do something with it. And that is the strength that I think I think that's what people mean. I imagine that is what people mean, is that what are your abilities to, what abilities do you hold to use the power and the privileges that you have, because anyway, those are some of the things I don't know that I answered your question, but those came to mind that I wanted to share.
You did. And then again, I just love the response. And then I also want to let people know the second question that we were prepared to ask and answer is, how has your understanding of confidence, humility, and arrogance shifted through your journey of owning your strengths? So that was the second question we are prepared to talk further. Before we switch to the question and answer Q&A at around 40. So we have some time, I want to hear more from Ying. Yeah.
Sorry, I kind of spaced out for a second because I was thinking about this, this what you said earlier, about that validation from white colleagues or white clients not being enough. And I was sitting with the enough wasn't enough to answer why that wasn't enough for me. So I was thinking about why wasn't that enough for me. And I think part of my focus with working with Asian Americans is really to understand ourselves, our psyche, how better, sort of really sort of immerse myself in that experience. And what in thinking about that question more, I think part of the Asian American suffering is kind of longing for this validation, right? Longing for this validation, why it's so painful that we don't belong? Why don't we, so painful that people think we're foreigners? So this longing, and my position is that this validation will never come. So to long for that in a professional practice is a fucking dead end.
Yes.
So I think I'm getting breadcrumbs and I can never eat the cake. So forget the cake. I'm gonna have pies. That I don't know. I don't have the analogy sticks, but that's kind of what I was thinking about and reflecting on a little bit.
Oh, can I add to that one? Because when you said that, I was like, yes, the same thing for judgment. I always feel like, I'm always thinking like, okay, why am I afraid of doing whatever? And I feel like, well, because they're going to judge me. They're going to think negatively of me. I'm going to be bad in some way. And I keep thinking, well, aren't they going to judge me anyway? I'm not going to be enough. They're still going to judge me. I might as well be judged for something that is me. I might as well make myself happy in the moment. And then, and I in the research world, there's the same analogy of like, well, why are you only studying Asian? And I'm always like, why not? Like, we're people too, like we're in the business of studying people. And similarly, it's like, well, it's not like Asians don't need mental health services, right? Like, why the question itself of why are we not allowed to do that is, I think, inherently the problem for me. Like, you have a private practice. It is private to you. You get to do whatever the hell you want. That is within licensure, and if you don't like that, then you can become something that doesn't require a license, that still uses the same skills. And yet still, it is still a private business where you get to decide for yourself, what services you provide, and people can duke it out in that way. And the same goes for research. We need research on all people, and we need people who specialize. And too many of us are talked out of that early in our careers. And so we don't end up specializing in the Asian American experience. And then now when this happens in our world, when anti-Asian racism becomes such a huge phenomenon, there aren't enough of us that are able to take media requests. And so everyone is burning out because it's the same 5 faces all over the news, because people have not specialized. So they cannot speak on it in a nuanced way beyond personal anecdotes, and that's a problem. So,
Yeah. In what you say, just remind me that psychodynamically speaking, that's a fantasy. That's the never fulfilled longing of belonging. Yeah. And so, yes. So I'm not going to get the pie or the cake ever, but I love those crumbs. I love the study on Asians. I love the clinical work with Asians. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Yes. Yeah. Well, this is such a big topic because, in my mouth, like, yes, yes, yes to everything you two say. And I'm also like, yeah, that's related to my work and my study on, we shame ourselves studying ourselves. There's so much shame and embarrassment about only, quote unquote, only or just work with or study Asian American or Asians or international Asians. Yeah. And so there's just a lot of shame comes with them. And I know that's my own response, and then we should make room right now for QA. Yes. Yeah. So let me hand it to Snehal right now. Yeah.
No, I'm so glad we don't have a ton of time for QA, but let's try to get some questions out there. Christine, I might need your help here. I've been looking for the raise hand button,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not sure we actually set up the webinar for that ahead of time. Can people just check to see when you go to participants and you click on that little arrow, is raise hands an option right there?
it should also be under reactions.
It's under reaction. Oh,
Yes.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
clearly y'all know I do not do Zoom that often. If you have questions, please use the raise hand button under reactions. And
Occupational hazard of teaching on Zoom.
I know, this is the joy of private practice. I'm like, I don't do this. So if people have questions, I really encourage you to think about reactions of what you might have, what you would like to ask Nellie and Yin right now. So often I think even here we can get into that habit of silencing ourselves or thinking we need the best question, or am I being too vulnerable when I ask this question? So I'll encourage people to consider it and raise hands.
I see a question in the chat box, Snehal.
Yeah, so maybe we'll go to that question first. This is from Sonia King. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. What would you recommend to a graduate student who wants to own my strength by unapologetically talking more about racial prejudices in a predominantly white faculty dynamic? The one POC faculty told me today that there is reverse racism for white people too, in parentheses, when I tried to talk about institutional racism. I am a little bit concerned about how I'm going to survive the next 2 years of grad school when I do not want to be tolerant of racism, but owning my strength by talking about my experiences is met with resistance. So the question is, what would you recommend to a grad student who would want to own their strength, but in such a difficult environment?
Mm-hmm.
I'm so sorry, Sonia, that you're dealing with that. That's awful. And it's pretty racist that you had to deal with that. And I'm sure it hurts even more because it came from your sole, only POC faculty member that I'm sure you held some expectations of. And it sounds like you were disappointed and let down, and I'm sure that hurts even more than had it come from someone else. So it teaches, I feel like that happens a number of times, and then you learn not to put people on a pedestal without evidence. So believe it when you see it. This is not your ally, right? I often like to tell graduate students that your job in graduate school is to survive it and get out without losing yourself. And I think it's the without losing yourself is where I hear your question coming from. And it sounds to me like you are already in acknowledgement that there are survival issues here for you. And so you have to tread, I would suggest you do have to tread a little bit lightly, but you can't, I wouldn't want to do this alone. It would be dangerous for you. It sounds like it's already dangerous for you. So my question would be, who do you have around you? And who can be witness to who can at least play witness to your pain in these circumstances? Do you have allies among your peer colleagues who can be with you so that if you had to endure pain, at least there are people who are witnessing it. And so it doesn't feel like you have to replay it in your head all the time and have people who validate you. I hope that you find graduate support groups. If you're doing anything that has to do with Asian Americans or mental health, please come to the Asian American Psych Association. We have lots of people who talk about this and who ask about this all the time. And it did a world of wonder for me when I was a graduate student to see things like that said and to have the responses mirrored back to me. When that happened to me in grad school, when my faculty members didn't get it and when they called me racist, I went to the Asian American Resource Center on campus, and I told them what happened. There was several things that happened, but at some point, I was such a loudmouth that people started telling me that I needed to not talk anymore because they saw all the signs that I was about to get pushed out of the program, and I was a year out from finishing. And it was with tears in her eyes that the director of the Asian American Resource Center at the time had gone to officials in the university to talk about whether or not they would have my back, or if something bad had happened, and whether or not they could do anything about it. And everyone who I trusted and who loved me and wanted to see me succeed basically sat me down and cried and told me that they felt like it was in my best interest for me to finish and get the hell out, because they saw that I was going to do good in the world. And they knew, given the players at hand, that I would experience a lot of career backlash if I said something. And so I feel like I share that story mostly because I do feel like I went on to do really great things. And so I think it's really important for you to find ways to stand up for yourself without sacrificing what you came there to do, because part of white supremacy is them not wanting you to succeed. So in the interest of radical self-care, I think I would want you to think about, it is not your responsibility to fix problems that you did not create, right? It is your choice. You have freedom to choose when you will educate the other person. But most importantly, it is, I want you to be able to stand up for yourself and to just at least go, ouch, that hurt, and to have people who witness it, who can say like, yeah, I saw that sucked, and for you to feel supported in that. But I fear the power that people are holding to prevent students like you from graduating who have voice and whose voices need to be out there in the world. And there are people probably in your program who don't want you to graduate and have that voice out in the world, so to really think about what can you get from these environments, what skills can you build, and who can you find allyship and solidarity with to survive this, and how can you at least stand up for yourself, but not feel the responsibility to educate everyone every single time. If you attempt to every time you see injustice, you must act. I hate that saying for POCs, because if we stopped to act on every injustice we saw, we would never sleep, we would not survive. So that message was not meant for us. It was meant for folks who sometimes see injustice, right? So be intentional about how you use your energy and your intelligence and your space to educate, and make sure that you're choosing the right people to give your effort to. You know, it sounds like this person is not the right person to be using your effort for. So, you know, move along. You have good things to say, stand up for yourself, and then find other spaces that you can grow and build, is what I would say.
Thanks so much, Nellie. I do want to make space for one more question. I think Trisha Murakawa, I think your hand is up, so I would love if you could unmute yourself and share your question.
Sure. Thank you, everybody. It's kind of related to what Nellie was saying. So I guess I wanted to ask, because you just shared sort of one person's, you just gave recommendations for one person and how you would make some change. I wanted to ask all of you what your thoughts are on how we can use this one moment, because it's not like anti-Asian violence and hate is a new thing, but how can we use this one moment right now, given that we are getting so much finally national news coverage and finally acknowledgement and awareness that it's happening to us? How can we use this one moment to make the transformational change that our community needs, both for ourselves, our community, as well as others and our allies? Because for me, as I am working with some allies, not AAPIs, there's mixed responses. They say yes, they want to support us, but then at the same time, some of them will say, well, of course, you know, our community has been more discriminated against than yours. And for me, it's like, it's not a competition for how much discrimination anybody has faced. How can we use this as an opportunity to make transformational change for ourselves, to make sure that we stop doing that crab thing, like you were talking about, Nellie, where people are trying to pull you down when you're bringing yourself up and you're bringing everybody else up with you, and help, you know, make some positive change. And I'm sorry for my inarticulate way of asking this question. It's that there's so much.
Absolutely, there is a lot. Curious, do our guest speakers, Nellie or Yin, have any responses?
Yin, you look like you're about to speak, so.
Yeah, I think it's such an important question. And it's an overwhelming question, you know, that there's so much that needs to happen. So I think where my mind goes is to what are the things that are more immediately closer to me and closer to us in this space. So some things that, you know, part of the reason why I wanted to do this was to encourage more Asian clinicians to consider, you know, seeing more Asian clients, whether it's exclusively or primarily, or really centering that if you want to. So I think, so related to the question is sort of like, what are we doing in our immediate lives that is not centering ourselves and our people, and why not? Right. So there's research about Asian Americans, you know, not so much, but there's zero research when two people in a therapy room are Asian, both the clinician and the client. Why is that? So for the researchers in the room, sort of encourage you guys to do that research. How do we center ourselves? I think that's the question that I would, you know, in answering this question from Trisha, to how do we, because this is a long-term sort of process. It's not this moment we're getting visibility, but how do we sustain this? Is by centering our experience. Yeah, I think that's my thoughts.
Thank you so much, Yin. That was beautiful.
Oh, can I?
Yes,
sorry. So eager on this one. This is I've been talking a lot about this topic, and so I feel like I have really strong feelings about it. And I think Ashley just wrote something in the chat that I agree with, which is the way we capitalize on this moment is to not talk about just Stop Asian Hate. It's that we owe it to our Black siblings and those who have been in charge of this, of the racial awakening that has happened in this country, that made this moment possible. And that in this moment, what we need to do is call for solidarity. Like, this isn't, I feel like, you know, there's conversations that are starting to happen around, like, why is it so easy to accept Stop Asian Hate, but not Black Lives Matter? We're actually asking for the same thing. Right. So what we need to do is start saying stop white supremacy, because that's really what it's about. Both things are responsible for the hate crimes that we're seeing. And we need to come together under that umbrella and stop being used to be pitted against groups, and to understand the Asian American experience. Yes, we do. I think we do need to understand the Asian American experience in its own right, and not be used by any group to drive any individual goal. And systemically, larger systems wise, anyone can have internalized oppression. And so it's not, I think that's where we need to start at home, is in like the internalized oppressions that we each are carrying that require us to seek validation for our own pain. Yes, we want the validation, we are hurting, and this is a system that was intended to do this to us, to keep us separated, to have us wanting validation from certain types of individuals. This is our moment to call for solidarity, to call on our Asian siblings to recognize in what ways they have themselves been propagating white supremacy, and to also then come into solidarity and continue to fight as a whole. Because a lot of us have been fighting for a long time and trying to help our Asian families and communities understand that, you know, when we say Black Lives Matter, it's because if Black lives don't matter, Asian ones don't either. And here we are, this is the example of that. So let's go, you know, like, I feel like this is the moment for us to say, let's go. This is what we've been waiting to bring everyone to the table for, you know. So I would like to see the movement go in that direction, and for us to capitalize on centering us as part of the movement, you know. So.
Thank you so much. I feel like this is such a powerful note to end on, to recognize our humanity is wrapped up in all of our humanity. None of us can really experience that sense of freedom if one of us is still in a lot of pain, right? So I feel like that, I'm so glad that we're ending on this note. One thing I did want to check in, I wanted to actually, give me a second. This feels really cool. And I'm like, oh, we have to stop, but we have to stop. Thank you both, Nellie and Yin, for your time, your wisdom, for your honesty. And our attendees, thank you so much. I can imagine how full your lives are, and for you to show up in this way, I feel like we're sort of living what both of our speakers are talking about. We can't do this alone. We learn from each other, we see each other, and we grow. And that's so important. One thing I am gonna ask is that, if you don't mind, Christine and I have a 2-minute survey that we're gonna ask people to fill out, if you don't mind. I'm shoving that into the chat box. So if you can take 2 minutes, it'll help us kind of figure out what we're doing well, what we need to improve on. Before I end, Christine, is there anything you wanted to add?
Not much. I'm just feeling very full and touched by what Nellie and Ying has been sharing, and what the questions has been, you know, the questions being asked, and then the inspiration that I'm feeling right now. And then if you have 2 minutes, please help fill out the survey so we can improve, and then we know what we are doing good. And I'm also sharing the link of our YouTube channel of Asian American Psychological Association. So this recording will be posted there. So if you want to share this talk with other folks, that's the channel you may share. Yeah.
Can I make a plug for the org? Putting on my AAPI hat for a second, if there are folks who are asking for collaboration, or who would like to do more of this type of work, please reach out to us. We are trying to grow as an organization. And we have way too much going on, but we're always looking for more folks who would like to do the work with us. And I would love to talk more about strategies for moving forward and organizing efforts and all of that. And our people are eager and willing and ready to do that work. And if that could be another thing that we capitalize on, is how do we do something with all the momentum that we do have, for those of us who have it. And there are lots of different ways to get through this time. But for those of us who need to do, I would love to do more together.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care. Hope we continue to have a rejuvenating experience this evening. Take care.
Bye.
Yeah.